we are going to be talking about midpoints and bisectors. And midpoints and bisectors. What is a midpoint? Where do you think the midpoint is? In the middle, right? Okay, so the midpoint of a segment is the first one we're going to do. The midpoint is what we're filling in. The midpoint of a segment is the point halfway between, aka in the middle of, the endpoints of the segment. Okay, the midpoint of a segment is the point halfway between the endpoints of a segment. A point is what we call equidistant. So E-Q-U-I and then distant, D-I-S-T-A-N-T. Equidistant. That means the same distance, okay? A point is equidistant from another point if it is the same distance from them, okay? We're just trying to define what equidistance means here. Okay, a point is equidistant from other points if it is the same distance away from them. The midpoint separates a segment into two. What did we discuss Friday? Two segments that were the same length. What did we call them? Starts with a C. Close. Congruent. Yeah, congruent. Okay. So the midpoint separates a segment into two congruent segments. That means they are equal. The lengths of them are equal. The distance from one to the other is the same as the distance from the other one. Okay, so we're going to start with a number line and finding the midpoint between 2 points on the number line. There are technically two ways we could do this. But it says if segment AB has endpoints x1 and x2. Does everybody see x1 and x2 on your picture? It's Monday, we must not be ready to talk. Okay, x1 is point A, x2 is point B. Those are the coordinates of the points. We don't know where they are on the number line yet, but we can figure it out. Not in this case. But let's say M is the midpoint. One way that I could determine what the coordinate of M is I could take this endpoint, I could add this one, and I divide by 2. That's finding the average, right? What's in the middle. So if you would take one point, you would add the other, we would divide by 2, and that would give you the midpoint. What would be an easier way? Could I just go and count from A to B, and then figure out half of that and go to M? Does that make sense? Okay, like this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 units away, right? So its midpoint would be 6 units away. So I would just go back to the beginning and I would count 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's where M should be. So one of two ways. You can either add the endpoints and divide by 2, or you can just count it off. So for example, we have a number line. Where is X? -3, all right? And Z is at 8. So we can take and add those together and divide by 2, but here's the problem. What kind of number is X at? A negative. So if I were to add a negative and a positive, isn't that technically subtracting? So let me show you a for example. If I were to do exactly what that tells me to do, this is why I don't really like this to do this one like this. If I were to take X and I were to add Z, what's -3 plus 8? 5. Do those look like they're only 5 units apart? No. Okay, let's just go back and do the counting thing. If I were to count from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 apart, right? So they're not technically 5 apart, they are 11 apart. So what happens is, in cases like this, when your numbers happen to be negative, we want to take the absolute value of them. What's the absolute value of negative 3? 3, okay. And then we would do it that way. So for a number line, my recommendation to you is, especially if you have some negatives in there, just count how far apart they are. So how many did I say they were apart? Actually, they are 11. What's half of 11? That's not an even number, is it? 5.5, right? So half of 11. Think if you had $11 and you cut it in half. That'd be $5.50, right? Yeah? Okay. So half of 11 is 5.5. So what we need to know is what number is 5.5 units away from these. I'm about to confuse y'all, right? Okay. Would it be okay if I just counted? All right, let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then a half. So I would be right here in between what two numbers? 2 and 3. What's halfway between 2 and 3? 2.5? Okay. So guess where M is? Or the midpoint? 2.5. Which I would get if I did it this way. The absolute value of 3, okay, plus 8, divided by 2. So that's 11. We would divide by 2. That tells me 5.5. Actually, I'm lying to y'all. What do I get if I add that again? You said 5? What's 5 divided by 2? 2.5. Isn't that what we got? 2.5? Okay, so let me refresh. If you want to find the distance, you need the absolute value. If you want to find the actual coordinate, you just add the numbers as they are. That's my bad. I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing on a Monday morning. So let me give you a different one to fix what my mistake was. Let me give you this number line. You don't have to write this down. I just want you to kind of. So, just real quick, in your head, do this thing. Add the 2 together, divide by 2, and tell me what the coordinate of my midpoint is. Okay, my midpoint is going to be somewhere in the middle. What do I get if I add negative 1 and 11? And 10 divided by 2 is 5. So my midpoint is going to be at 5. So there's your midpoint. And think about that. That's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And then there it's directly in the middle. Does that make a little bit of sense there? Did I confuse y'all too much by my mistake? All right, do the next example then for me. Oh, yes. I want to find the coordinate of the midpoint. So to do that, again, all you have to do is add the coordinates of your endpoints, divide it by 2, and that tells me the coordinate of my midpoint. Okay, sorry about my mistake there. I was thinking about finding a distance, not the actual coordinate. What is one of my endpoints? Okay, plus what's my other endpoint? And I'm going to divide that by 2. What's negative 5 plus 7? And 2 divided by 2 gives me a coordinate of 1. All right, do the next one. Ben travels from his school on 38th Street to the library on 62nd Street. He, I don't know what the rest of it says, walks halfway there, I guess, to take a break. Where does he stop to rest? So find out what street is halfway in between his house and the school. To find the coordinate, we add the endpoints and divide by 2. To find the distance, we can just count or do the absolute values. How many streets away is his school from his house? There's no numbers on this place, right? So can we just count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 streets away. So what would halfway be? 3. So let's count again. What are 3 streets away? 1, 2, 3. So he stops to take a break at 50th Street. Does that make a little bit of sense? Yeah. Okay, flip it over. Now, to find the midpoint on a coordinate plane, it is slightly different. Okay, and here's the reason why. A coordinate plane is an ordered pair, an x value and a y value. So when you find the midpoint of an ordered pair, you're going to have to find another ordered pair, so an x and a y. It's going to be very similar, but slightly also different. So do we see point P has what we call x1, y1 on your paper? At point P, you see it has an ordered pair x1, y1. And then point Q, it has an x2, y2. That just means there are 2 different x coordinates and 2 different y coordinates. M is the middle. Okay. If PQ has coordinates, or endpoints, I guess is what we would want to call them, at P and Q on the coordinate plane, then here's the formula for the midpoint. I'm going to highlight it here. When we take our quiz on Thursday, I will give you this formula. You do not have to remember it, okay? So what it means is to find the midpoint of a coordinate plane. And think back to the number line. What did we do to the endpoints to find the midpoint? The one we did on the front page? We added them and divided by 2. Okay, so the same thing here, except for we're going to add just the x values together. So we're going to add our x1 value plus our x2 value, and we're going to divide that by 2. That is going to give me the x value of my midpoint in this coordinate plane. But we don't just have x values, we also have y values. So I'm going to do the same thing with the y's. I'm going to add my y1 and my y2, and I'm going to divide that by 2. That would give me the y value. So you're technically doing the same thing, but also slightly different because it's a coordinate plane with an ordered pair x and y instead of just points. Everybody ready? All right. Our first example, find the coordinates of M, the endpoint, for segment AB. What is the ordered pair for A? What does it tell you on your paper? -2 and 1. So what I like to do is I like to label those. That's x1 and y1. I'm just going to put it above. That way when I plug it into my formula, I do not make any mistakes. Now, does it matter if I call A x1, y1 and B x1, y1? No, it doesn't really matter. Okay, just as long as one of them is x1, y1. So what would B have to be? x2 and y2, right? Again, to find the midpoint, what we want to do is we want to add the 2 x values. What are my 2 x values? -2 plus 8, and we're going to divide that by 2. What's -2 plus 8? 6, and then 6 divided by 2 is 3. Okay, so my x value is going to be 3. And then for my y's, I do exactly the same thing, except for I add my y values. What is my y1? 1. Plus my y2 is 3. I'm going to divide that by 2. What's 1 plus 3? And 4 divided by 2 is 2. So my midpoint is going to be at the ordered pair 3, 2. So there's a difference. One's a number line with just endpoints, add, divide by 2. That gives you the coordinate of the midpoint. If it is an ordered pair or from a graph, you add your x's, divide by 2, add your y's, divide by 2, and that is the resulting midpoint ordinate. I can't talk. Ordered pair is what I was trying to say. All right, go ahead and try the next one, just like the first one. It gives you A at -3 and -2. It gives you C, and it wants you to find the midpoint between the two. Add the x's, divide by 2. Add the y's, divide by 2. Write your answer as an ordered pair, x, comma, y. What did you get after you added the x's and divided by 2? What did you get? Add the x's, divide by 2. Is that good enough? Add your y's, divide by 2. The result is going to be your ordered pair, x, comma, y. Ordered pairs that they give you for A's. Add the 2 x's divided by 2. Add the 2 y's divided by 2. That is your resulting ordered pair for the midpoint. My ordered pair for A is -3, -2. Again, I like to label as x1, y1. C is 5 and 10, so I'm going to label that as x2, y2. And then for my midpoint, I take my 2 x values, so -3 plus 5. Divide that by 2. What's -3 plus 5? 2. And 2 divided by 2 is 1. Then we do the same thing with the y's. -2 plus 10. What's -2 plus 10? And 8 divided by 2 is 4. There is my midpoint. Okay, so again, on a number line, you add the 2 endpoints, you divide by 2. That gives you the coordinate there. If it's ordered pairs, add the x's, divide by 2. Add the y's, divide by 2. That gives you your ordered pair midpoint. Does that make sense? All right, so when I pass this out, so on questions 1 through 6, that's a number line. So find the endpoints they're talking about. Like, for example, the first one, it says KM. So what is K at? What is M at? Add those together, divide by 2. That gives you the answer. And then 7 through 12 are the ordered pairs where you have to do the x's and the y's. And then 13 is just a word problem. So far, so good? Everybody okay? Add, divide by 2. That's pretty much all we're doing, right? If I were you, I would take this good bit of time we have and just go ahead and do my homework so I don't have to worry about it later. Huh? Remember, if you need a calculator, they are up front. Just make sure you put them back when you're done with it. And some of your homeworks may be like sideways. That's because the printer was messing up on Friday.